Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist, Learn Languages, Make a Difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Diego Lopez, and today we're going to learn about a word that is simple yet very difficult to understand in its grammatical use. It's the word se. Now let's jump right into it and analyze the forms and the usages of se. Now, first of all, we're not talking about se as in the first person singular of the verb to know, saber. We're talking about se as a word without an accent that is invariable, meaning it's always written this way, se without any accent. Now, we have two main usages of se. We have the paradigmatic se and the non-paradigmatic se. Now, the paradigmatic se has in turn various usages. The first one is the use of se as a substitute or replacement. The second one is as a reflexive, the reciprocal se, the pronominal se, and the dative se. And the second type of se is the se no paradigmatic or the non-paradigmatic se. In this case, we can use it as an impersonal form of se or as a reflexive passive. Now, let's talk about the paradigmatic se. When do we use it as a replacement? Well, whenever the indirect object pronouns le or les are followed by a direct object pronoun such as lo, la, los, or las. In that case, le or les, depending on the case, are transformed into se. So for instance, if I say, a mi amigo le compré el libro, meaning I bought a book, libro, to my friend, a mi amigo. Well, in this sentence, we have a direct object, which is el libro, the book, is that which I bought. It is the direct recipient of my action of buying something, i.e. the book. And then we have my friend, who is the person for whom I bought the book, and therefore the indirect object, the indirect recipient of my action of buying. I didn't buy my friend. What I bought was a book, direct object, for my friend, indirect object. And so now, suppose we want to replace el libro with a direct object pronoun and a mi amigo with an indirect object pronoun, right? And then le, which is redundant with a mi amigo, because le refers to a mi amigo, with an indirect object pronoun. Now, in that case, I replace el libro with lo, because it's masculine singular, lo. But then I cannot say a mi amigo le lo compré. Rather, I have to transform le into se and say a mi amigo se lo compré. So in this case, se replaces le. It's a substitute. Another example, if I say le entregué las tareas al profesor, meaning I handed the homework to the professor. Well, in this case, we have a direct object, which is the homework, that which I handed, the direct recipient of my action of handing something. And then the professor, who is the indirect object, because it's the indirect recipient of my action of handing something in. I did not hand the professor in, I handed the homework in to my professor. And now, when we replace the direct object with a pronoun, las tareas, therefore las, and the indirect object with another pronoun, al profesor, so le, now we replace le with se, and we say se las entregué. I handed them in to him. Now, this type of se is also known sometimes as false se, se falso, or spurious se. Why? Because it's not really a se, it's just an indirect object pronoun of which we have changed some letters from le into se or from les into se. Now, the second type is the reflexive. We have a reflexive whenever the person or object that does the action coincides with the person or object that receives the action. And so we use the se in those cases where those actions are expressed in the third person, be it singular or plural. So in that case, se functions as a direct complement assuming there's no other direct complement in the sentence, or as an indirect complement if there's already a direct complement. For instance, if I say, mi hermano se lavó la cara, meaning my brother washed his face. Now, the person who does the action, my brother, and the person who receives the action, my brother, are one and the same. Therefore, I use a reflexive se to mark that action. Mi hermano se lavó la cara, as opposed to mi hermano lavó la cara, in which case we will be talking about somebody else's face. Or, los invitados se ducharon antes de ir a la fiesta. So, the guests took a shower before going to the party. Now, the guests themselves did the action and they also received the action because what they took a shower on were their own bodies. And that's why we use se. Los invitados se ducharon antes de ir a la fiesta. Now, another type of paradigmatic se is the reciprocal se. Now, here we have a similar case than the reflexive se, but in this case, person or object A performs an action over person or object B and vice versa. And we only use this with the plural forms. And the problem is that these plural forms can be ambiguous. For instance, if I say nos vemos, do I mean that we see each other? I do an action upon you and you do an action upon me that is of the same genre? Or do I mean that each of us separately sees himself in the mirror? So it could be we see ourselves or we see each other. It can be any of those. Or if I say se ven, does that mean that they see each other or does that mean that they see themselves? Again, it could be they see themselves, it can be they see each other. In order to disambiguate this, we use the equivalent of one another. So we use el uno al otro o los unos a los otros o la una a la otra o las unas a las otras. Right? This means one another, each other. So if I say nos vemos el uno al otro, it means we see each other. Now we know there's no possibility that the translation is we see ourselves because we already specified that it was each other, one another, el uno al otro, right? Se ven los unos a los otros, they see each other. The fourth type of paradigmatic se is the pronominal form. Now, in the pronominal form, we have verbs that always, meaning obligatorily so, compulsorily so, include a reflexive pronoun. Now, in this case, that pronoun does not fulfill any function as a direct or indirect object, but rather it functions as a syntactic marker or as a pronominal morpheme. For instance, ella no se atreve a mentir means she does not dare to lie. Or mis vecinos se quejaron del ruido en mi habitación, meaning my neighbors complain about the noise in my room. Now here, the use of se is compulsory. I cannot say ella no atreve a mentir. That doesn't make any grammatical sense in Spanish. And by the same token, I cannot say either mis vecinos quejaron del ruido en mi habitación. I have to use obligatorily so se. Now, some verbal expressions have both a non-reflexive version and a reflexive version. And the meaning of the expression changes depending on whether we are using that reflexive pronoun or not. For instance, if I say, mis hermanos parecen enojados, it means my brothers look angry, right? So, parecer, expresión copulativa, i.e. ser estar. However, if I say, mi hermano se parece a mi hermana, here, the meaning of parecerse is not to look, but to look like. In this case, my brother looks like my sister. They look alike. So parecerse a is an expression of resemblance. Now, in this case, the use of the reflexive pronoun is optional, and it does not change the meaning of the verb. It only adds emphasis, as in the interest dative or dativo de interés, emotional implication, as in the ethical dative or dativo ético, and responsibility, as in the accidental se or se accidental. Now, let's begin with the interest dative or dativo de interés. If I say, Héctor se comió todas las galletas, I could have just said, Héctor comió todas las galletas, and that would have been perfectly grammatical. Now, what changes when I add se? Héctor se comió todas las galletas. It just emphasizes the fact that he did away with all the biscuits around there. So we emphasize the intensity of the action. He really ate all the biscuits by himself. Whereas if I say Héctor comió todas las galletas, there is no particular connotation in there. It just means he ate the biscuits. Now, what about the ethical dative or dativo ético? If I say la niña no se me porta bien, it's different from la niña no se porta bien. So if I say la niña no se me porta bien, it means she does not behave well to me. So now I'm adding an extra layer of emotional implication in the girl. And this will make sense, for instance, in a context where the girl is my daughter, right? And if she is my daughter and she is a little kid, as in a niña, then it stands to reason that I have a certain responsibility in her upbringing, and therefore she does not behave herself. This is a failure to comply with the rules by which I have been educating her, right? So that's why we add the se to imply an emotional connection between myself and the daughter in question. So it's an ethical dative, and it underlies or stresses the emotional connection with the person or thing we're talking about, in this case, la niña. And finally, we have the se accidental or accidental se, and this is used to express that whatever happened in the sentence was an accident, was not done on purpose. For instance, Lucía se olvidó de las llaves. Lucía forgot the keys. Connotation is very different when we add se in the translation into Spanish, because in the English sentence, Lucia forgot the keys. Who is to blame? Lucia, because she did an action, that of forgetting the keys, so it's her fault. However, if I say Lucia se olvidó de las llaves, it just means that this situation happened to her. So she's not really the subject of that action, but the recipient, the victim of that having forgotten the keys. And we can express this even more clearly when we change the sentence into a Lucía se le olvidaron las llaves, meaning to her, this accident happened, the accident of forgetting the keys. So that's why we speak of se accidental. We use this in order to express lack of responsibility, or the fact that we were the victim of a situation that happened to us, rather than us being the initiators of that action. So this exonerates Lucia of any responsibility. So far, so good. We have reviewed already the paradigmatic se, and now we jump right into the non-paradigmatic se, which is more simple than the paradigmatic se because we only have two variants, impersonal and reflexive passive. Now, what about the impersonal form of the non-paradigmatic se? Now, in this case, the se constitutes a marker of impersonality that prevents the appearance of any subject. And so the structure is as follows. We use se, then a verb in the third person singular, never plural, it has to be singular. And then we can use a preposition, an adverb, or a verb. So for instance, if I say, se habla mucho del coronavirus, this means a lot of people speak about coronavirus, but literally it means coronavirus is much spoken about. So notice that nobody does any action here. There is an action, but we do not know by whom this action is done. Se habla mucho del coronavirus. Se habla who? We don't know. That's why it's impersonal. The se serves as a marker of impersonality. Se habla mucho del coronavirus. And this is an impersonal se, not only because it expresses impersonality, but also because of the form. The verb in the third person singular, habla, from the infinitive hablar, to speak, is followed by an adverb of quantity. Mucho, meaning a lot. Another example, se está muy bien aquí. It is great to be here, right? Here, one feels at ease. Who? We don't know. Se is impersonal. It deflects our attention from whoever experiences that situation. And then again, it complies with the form of the impersonal se, is se plus a verb in the third person singular, in this case, estar, and then an adverb. How are we here? How do we feel when we're here? Muy bien. So the idea is that we tend to use this impersonal se when we want to focus on the action, and whoever does the action is either not relevant or not convenient to specify. And this is different from the reflexive passive, which is the second type of non-paradigmatic se. Now in the reflexive passive, we have the se as a marker of passivity rather than impersonality. And the way it's constructed varies slightly, grammatically speaking. So we have se plus a verb, but in this case, the verb can either be in the third person singular or the third person plural. Whereas remember that in the case of the impersonal se, it could only be in third person singular. Now it can be either third person singular or plural. And what follows right after that is going to be a noun that is going to act as the patient subject. Now, what does that mean? It means that it agrees with the verb in number and gender, but it does not perform the action. It's grammatically a subject, but not semantically a subject. It's grammatically a subject because it has to agree number and gender with the verb, but it's not semantically a subject because it does not refer to anything or anybody that performs any action. Let's see an example. Se venden tomates. We have se, a verb in the third person plural, therefore it couldn't possibly be impersonal se, it has to be reflexive passive. And then a noun, tomates, tomatoes, that agrees in number, in this case in the plural, with the verb. Venden tomates, right? Se venden tomates. Tomatoes are sold. By whom? We don't know. But what we know is that the tomatoes themselves do not perform any action. But what we do know is that even then, they are the subject, grammatically speaking, because they do agree in number with the verb. Hence, sujeto paciente. Another example, se compra oro. We have se plus the verb in third person singular. So it could technically be at this point either reflexive passive or impersonal se. But then what we have right after the verb is a noun. So it has to be a reflexive passive. And the noun again is singular. Therefore, it agrees with the verb as it has to do. And is not the semantic subject because again, the gold oro does not perform any action, i.e. that of buying things. The gold does not buy anything. Gold is being bought, yet it agrees with the verb. And therefore, it is a sujeto paciente. So that's all for me. Remember, two types of se, paradigmatic and non-paradigmatic. Within the paradigmatic, we have sustituto, reflexivo, recíproco, pronominal, and dative. And within the non-paradigmatic, we have impersonal and reflexive passive. If you have any questions, comments, please write them down below. And as always, thanks for watching.